the way we've structured our program, I think the only tenure track faculty member we have is the program director, who's actually got a PhD, and he's doing the whole academic thing. And all of the other instructors are like me; they're all working professionals who are teaching on the side. I will admit there are times that I'm very jealous of my colleagues in math who don't have to update their calculus syllabus every time they teach it, because really not that much has changed. Like Brandon said, it's very helpful to get that real world practitioner experience into the classroom, because this is a field of study that is constantly changing. The bad guys are constantly coming up with new stuff. We're constantly inventing new tools and defenses. Speed and that responsiveness kind of runs counter to a lot of traditional academic incentives.
Hey, this is Dave Johnson. Welcome to the Job Security Podcast. We're here to explore the unique perspectives and stories of the people who make this industry what it is, whether they realize it or not. Every security career starts with education. Depending on what your focus is and the year you started, education paths in cybersecurity differ greatly. Matthew Gracie and Brandon Levene are longtime security practitioners who found their way to the front lines of the security career generation process. They became professors. This show is going to cover their individual journeys, the student perspective of today, and what the cybersecurity professional of tomorrow might look like. I remember hearing a while back that if you want to know what the professional of tomorrow looks like, just ask a teacher. So we've got two to talk to today. So Matt Gracie is a longtime blue teamer who's now an adjunct professor in the cybersecurity program at Canisius University. And Brandon Levene is a product manager and an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, teaching cybercrime and cybercriminals. Matt and Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start with what was your cybersecurity education like? And depending on when you get started, that answer can be it was basically nothing and just me doing stuff to figure problems out, or some courses, etc. Brandon, let's start with you. What was your education like when you first started to get into cybersecurity?
I have no formal background in comp sci or security. In fact, my degree was obtained by going to the advising office senior semester, or first semester of what would be my senior year at FAU, and asking, what degree can I get the fastest? They said psychology based on your previous coursework. And I said, cool, that's my major now. So I actually have no background in cyber, although psychology has been surprisingly useful, as you might imagine. I actually got started with cracking Palm Pilot programs when I was a kid. They used a lot of them used an XML registration protocol for licensing. So if you could enumerate what a proper license looked like in XML, you could use a paid Palm Pilot program, which was great. Started reading PCAPs on hub networks when I was 13, 14. Remember going to LAN parties when I was 14, 15, dropping sub 7 on people's machines when they went to the restroom. And my absolute favorite part of sub 7 was reversing the mouse buttons. Zoom and shoot were reversed, which will make any gamer just infuriated when their tools are not working in time. So that was great. But yeah, my background, my education really predates a lot of the cybersecurity stuff. There was not a whole lot out there. There was still there was the SAN certifications, there was Security Plus, things like that, sort of the orthogonal to traditional education, or the certification path. I ended up doing those after I got my first job in security. I did get a Security Plus pretty quickly early on, but then I did a lot of SANS courses because they were paid for, and OSCP, things like that, after I got my first job as a security analyst.
Yep. And you and I actually worked together as analysts. You sat a couple seats down from me next to Ed and Allison and whatnot. She took the overnight shifts for the most part. So
yeah, and I was on the second shift in Rhode Island next to the peanut factory.
yeah, the place smelled great. Not very much in the way of light, but if you like peanuts,
Fun.
Was it actual? It was an actual peanut factory.
There was one very nearby. Yeah.
Wow. How about that? Very cool.
Matt, how did you get started, education wise? What happened?
Well, I think Brandon and I came up at roughly the same time, so we had fairly similar experiences. I mean, when I was when I was a teenager back in the late 20th century. Um, I was big in the local BBS scene and IRC, and so I saw a lot of the same, software cracks and stuff like that Brandon did. And then when I went to college, and it was fun. I don't know how universal this experience was, but I know a lot of my friends did. I got to college, I was like, you know what? I am done being a computer nerd. I'm going to major in something else. So I ended up getting an English degree, right? But I paid my tuition all the way through by working IT help desk jobs. And I graduated and I was like, oh, so the only marketable skill I actually have as a holder of an English degree is IT. So I continued doing that. And I was working at my alma mater as a desktop support guy. They hired me to support the Macintosh users on campus. And our CIO said, you know what, we should probably have a dedicated security person. This was in about 2005, 2006. And, people were starting to get more concerned about threat actors and that kind of thing. And he basically looked around the team and said, all right, Gracie, you're our security guy. And he sent me to a SANS training. And that was how it all started.
It starts with SANS. I mean, I remember my first copy of Sub 7. I remember messing with my friends as well. And then I remember thinking, hey, I could use this to fix computers remotely because it gave you so much control. And when I was 13 or roughly, I started like my own cyber repair shop around that and leveraged that for just remote access. I mean, it had a self-destruct mechanism where it could remove things.
That is actually how a large number of threat actors stayed under the radar for remote access Trojans. They would call them remote access tools. So a lot of them stayed under the radar by basically going with the argument of I'm not responsible for what users do with this software until we could actually prove intent from a legal perspective of this has no actual positive or beneficial intent. This is purely for information theft and remote control in violation of multiple laws in the U.S. and across the world. So it's an interesting paradigm to hear someone actually using one for a legitimate purpose. It's extremely rare.
It seemed natural to me. I'm like, I'm not old enough to drive, so but I can use electrons to make money. So and this is one of those questions. Every now and again I think about like what's the next thing that I want to do, and like my ADD takes me in 14 different directions. One of those is potentially maybe want to teach, because every now and again somebody's like, you lecture a lot and people fall asleep sometimes. Maybe you should become a teacher. I'm like, that's not how that works. I'd be bad at that. But I was curious, like, what brought you to this position? What was there a moment? Matt, like, did you just fall into it? Somebody pointed around the room and said, like, you can do this. How did that work?
Yeah. So when I was working for the IT department at the college, I was an adjunct professor for computer science. I taught the freshman sort of survey course. The freshman computer science survey course was cross-listed as a math elective. So we ended up with all the students who didn't want to take a real math class, and it was at 8:30 in the morning. So I don't recommend that experience. But I had that on my resume, and then years later, I wanted to start a B-Sides conference here in Buffalo because we didn't have one. And I reached out to the school that I used to work at, that I graduated from, because they had just started this graduate program in cybersecurity. I said, listen, I think this would be a great opportunity. We'll host it at the school. It'll be a good sort of cross-promotional thing for prospective students. I can use the facilities, you can use the publicity. And the director said to me, you know what? I love it. That's a great idea. We could really use a B-Sides conference here in Buffalo. Oh, by the way, I have a couple courses I need an instructor for. I was like, okay, I see where this is going. I just got quoed. I quid pro gen, you hit me with the quo. That's how it goes. So that was kind of the deal that we struck, in exchange for the department sponsoring the B-Sides and helping me get the facilities and stuff. I came on board as an instructor. So this is my fifth year. I teach. I started off teaching the network class, and then a couple years ago in the fall, I switched to teaching what we call cybersecurity operations, which is the blue team class, and I teach ethical hacking in the spring. So I teach the students how to defend stuff, and then I teach them how to break all the stuff I taught them the previous semester, which is fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. If you had to go back 5 years ago and tell yourself like something you've learned like up to now, what would that be? Like, would there be a difference in like structure of course? Would it be just like, hey, make sure you have more Red Bull for the students in the class?
Um, I think the biggest thing is that compared to my previous experience teaching undergrads, now I'm teaching graduate students, and so they have to be handled a little bit differently. When you're dealing with undergrads, there's kind of a uniformity of experience, right? They're for the most part, there are occasional exceptions, but for the most part, they're 17, 18 years old. They're all fresh out of high school. They've all got pretty similar educational backgrounds at this point. But when you're teaching graduate students, it's a completely different deck of cards, right? Sometimes I'll get a student who says, I did my undergrad degree in computer science. I've been working an IT job for like 5 or 6 years, but I want to pivot into security. So I think that this graduate security program is really going to help me make that transition. And I had a student a couple years ago who came up to me on the first day and said, look, I just got my undergraduate degree in accounting. Turns out accounting sucks. Hacking sounds really cool. Can you teach me how to do that? So, I didn't quite realize that difference the first year, and it really affects how you pitch the material, right? Because you have to come up with something that's going to be interesting enough that those experienced veterans don't get bored and stop paying attention, but it still has to be fundamental and introductory enough that those people who don't really have a heavy technical background can still follow along and not get frustrated when you get to the hands-on part.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. So what do you think the secret sauce to that is? Is that just like having more hands-on stuff? What does that involve?
Yeah, yeah. So what I did was I ended up structuring my courses. I teach a night class. I teach once a week, and it's a 3-hour chunk. So what I generally do is I'll spend the first hour to hour and a half on lecture, introducing the subject, walking them through it, showing them examples, that kind of thing. And then the last half of the period is all hands-on lab stuff. So I
Mhm.
give them a set of challenges, or problems that they can solve. I let them work on it for 45 minutes or so, and then I go through it with them on the big screen. So the idea is, if they're new, they may struggle a little bit, but the documentation is there and I'm there and I'll walk them through it at the end. If the more experienced people blow right through it, I'll usually have a couple of extra sort of bonus challenges. Hey, you're already done with that. Why don't you see if you can figure out this piece? Right. Oh, you've got the SQL injection to work. How about we crank the difficulty level up and you do it without using or, right? And just try to keep them engaged that way.
Nice. I was thinking about some of those logic statement attacks the other day because I was watching one of the new DC movies involving the character known as King Shark, and I'm like, wait a second, a logic statement is King Shark is a shark, and one is equal to one. From there, and I'm like, why have I not thought of this before and leveraged that? Um, Brandon, like I I remember I know some of the journey that you've had becoming a professor and keeping that professorship. Like, how did you start, and like, did you want to comment on like some of those tribulations as well?
So the way I became a professor was much less formal. Um, I was at the first LabsCon put on by Sentinel One in Arizona. So shout out to my lads and lasses that put that on. Wonderful, one of the best research oriented conferences. And at one of the after parties, as one does, I got to talking to Professor Thomas Ridd, who has multiple very, very interesting books, including Active Measures, which is a fascinating book. Um, and I knew that he had recently been named the managing director for the Alperovitch Institute, sponsored, underwritten by Dmitry Alperovitch through extremely generous donations to the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, which is a policy school. And a number of my peers were teaching as adjuncts under that program. So a bunch of nation state things, semiconductors, and things like that. But there was, I looked at the curriculum and said, there's nobody here that does cybercrime. And one of my friends looked at me and goes, "Yes, because whenever I think about cybercrime, my brain glazes over. But you could do it. You should go talk to Thomas." So I went and talked to Thomas. Now, meanwhile, this is like 3 or 4 in the morning. We had a great conversation. Um, emailed a little bit back and forth. I was like, "Hey, I'm still willing to teach a cyber criminals course. I'll develop it from soup to nuts, right?" And I did. And I'm also teaching graduate students, and I'm also teaching at 8 or 8:30 a.m. on a Monday morning. So by choice, because that is the time that works for me, as I live a ways away from the DC campus where we teach. So I'm going into my third year now of teaching the course. Although I'm not teaching in the fall, I'm teaching an updated version in the spring. Um, yeah, echoing Matt. Uh, I graduate students I also have lots of Space Force because of an agreement with the university. So I've got a lot of armed forces members in my classes. I've got a lot of I've got some fresh out of university. I've got some that have been in the industry, that have been in the workforce for 15 years. I've got people that are in armed forces, domestic and international. We've got people getting their second master's degrees. And the fun thing is, it is not a computer science school. It is very much a policy focused school. So I generally have to assume that using a computer is somewhat more of a challenge than others. And by the end, I have them using shout out to KC7 Cyber for interactive labs to just find badness after I present them with, "Hey, here's how to understand this threat actor's manual. Here's what it actually means. Let's go find some of this stuff in a real environment." I found that lab experience is really nice. But um, so far, I've only had, like, for me, it's an elective, right? I'm there because it's not because I'm getting paid. I am, but that's nice. But I'm there because, for me, I was a bit passionate about understanding and really communicating the threat and just really everything about cybercrime, because it's really been largely ignored, and out on the soapbox now. Sorry. Um, and my goal was, if anybody, any student or anybody that I lecture to is in a place to make even a 1% better or more informed decision having to do with cybercrime or just computer security in general, I am extremely happy. They don't even need to necessarily make the right decision, but at least they thought about it. I'm cool with that. So that's why I do it. Because otherwise, I tell you, I loathe driving. I would not drive an hour and a half at 5:15 in the morning to go into DC, and then stay all day in the city. Just not my favorite thing to do. So
Yeah. On his best day, DC traffic is not great. Um, I'm also familiar. So I wanted to ask both of you, like, it sounds like you've got a really solid mix of like people who have different areas of education. Are you seeing any trends in like what kinds of students are coming to you? I mean, Brandon, you've got military people with military background, but like, are you seeing any trends overall in the kinds of perspectives or the kinds of expertise that they're bringing at the beginning of the course, and kind of what the difference between what they're leaving with? Any ideas along that?
so for the program that I'm a part of, it's really interesting because I think I've had one student out of about 60 or 70 that has an actual comp sci background. Um, I had one with a kind of a with like a pseudo crypto background. I was at least familiar, not cryptocurrency, actual real crypto, not magic space, not magic internet money. Um, Otherwise, almost everybody that I've taught has been a policy focused, which is par for the course for the School of Advanced International Studies in DC, right? Um, I've also noticed a couple of interesting things. The vast majority of my classes have been female in 2 out of 4 semesters, so that's been very interesting to me. Um, that as I think most of us know, representation of gender representation and diversity in our industry is not super high. Just happens to be that's the case. But like, yeah, I get a huge diversity of students in my class, which is fantastic to see. Um, and that gives me some hope for the future, right? Because we've seen kind of what the monolith of monothought has sort of given us in the last 10 or so years. Um, and then I think the policy perspectives are really interesting as well. From my perspective, I'm not a policy person. In fact, I largely poo-poo on policy because it doesn't actually put people. As an old mentor of mine once said, the best way to cluster threat actors is in a prison cell, and I don't find policy always particularly effective at that from a timeliness or an efficacy perspective. But I've learned from my students, hey, policy is largely the usage of policy is largely is an influence factor, right? And so cogently being able to communicate your desires for a policy is 95% of the battle there. And I learned a lot of that from my own students, which I found fascinating, right? So I think that's been a really interesting perspective, is the political perspective getting brought into my class really from the get-go is not something that I've really have any professional experience with, and it's been an interesting dichotomy to balance.
Yeah, for me, the areas of expertise that I know the least about, obviously, are the greatest areas for improvement and increase in knowledge, and often I gravitate towards those. I can totally see where that would be really interesting, because you're like, this is not something I've ever had to do organically, naturally, or in courses before, and now I've got to think about that. And your psychology background is probably informing some of your perspectives, or at least giving you more critical structure to think about that policy as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and then one of my favorite exercises that I do is I will make the students profile a persona from one of the Conti leaks, right? So we have, fortunately, due to those leaks, we have a massive amount of just chat conversations of normal people just doing crime and operating in crime, and really just having them understand, like, okay, these are people, but evaluate what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what like policy and what life conditions causes to happen. Yes, they are criminals, undoubtedly. Some of them are actual shitlords, like they're actually awful people. Not all of them are. It does get a little bit more complex than that. In my previous life, as a threat researcher, it's generally always, spy versus spy, bad versus good, the dark side versus the light side. And there is quite a bit of depth and understanding the human aspects of many threat actor operations.
What about yourself? Like, what kinds of things are you seeing, like, that are what's the delta between the students that are onboarding into your class, that are signing up, coming in, and what are you seeing them leave with? Like, any significant changes in perspective or expertise that you're like, hey, they started with this background and now they're armed with this information, and now they're thinking about using it in this particular way. Like, they started a direct connection with their career path, or they found a new one. Any anecdotes about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down. I want to sort of piggyback on something Brandon said about being in a policy-focused program. Is cybersecurity as an academic field is obviously fairly new, right? I mean, none of us who are teaching in cybersecurity programs have cybersecurity degrees for the most part. We all learned it before this was a formal thing. And I think we're kind of in that same stage that computer science was back in the 60s and 70s, when it was still mostly math professors, right, who just happened to be teaching computer science stuff, and it hadn't really coalesced. So curricula at different institutions are not standardized. Brandon is obviously teaching a lot of policy focused stuff because he's at a policy school. We have a cybersecurity program locally that grew organically out of the criminal justice school, or the criminal justice program at the school where it's being taught. And they have a very heavy emphasis on forensics and investigation, because that's what the professors were familiar with. We have another program here that grew out of that university's accounting school. So it's very focused on audit and compliance and GRC because that regulatory environment is what they were comfortable with. Our particular program is overseen by the computer science department. So it's very technically oriented, a lot less of
Mhm.
that policy or compliance stuff and a lot more hands-on, where do the packets actually go, hands-on keyboard kind of stuff. Um, so our students are going to get a very different experience than the students in one of those other programs just because we're emphasizing different things as an institution. And I think uh, that's something that's bound to converge a bit over the years. But at this point, if I see somebody on LinkedIn or I see a resume across my desk and it says, I have a master's degree in cybersecurity and I've never heard of the school, I honestly have no idea what they might have learned during that master's degree, right? It's kind of an interesting
It's a bit of a
Wild
toss
West
up.
time. Yeah.
Bit of a toss up for sure.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Every now and again, I think to myself, like, hey, I keep encountering people who have degrees in things, and I didn't do that. I started doing this when I was 12, and now I'm just still here. And so 26 years later, there are people like you who are doing professorships, who are providing the education for this. You also were some of the first cybersecurity professionals. You're staying on the cutting edge. You're like, hey, I'm going to do this thing that's never been done before. Cool. I learned all of that. And now I have stuff to share, and I have expertise and wisdom that I've evaluated. And over time, I can help people avoid mistakes that I've made, or at least that's how I think about teaching. Is like, hey, I've done like 1,000 of these things. Don't do those. These are okay, though. You're effectively the first cybersecurity professors, like the first generation of that. And somebody had to be the first engineer. Somebody had to be the first surgeon, the first pilot. And today in this generation, that's you. And what's really fascinating to me is like, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes I feel like a little bit of like, do I belong here? Because now I interact with people who like they have PhDs in this, and then I realize they're the ones asking me for advice. So I still have something of value here to provide. Like, do you ever feel that?
There's a lot to be said for practical expertise, though I will say that the university, particularly within the Alperovitch Institute, has been very much leaning into oh, just because you're not career academia doesn't mean you don't have amounts of interesting things that we just don't necessarily have the direct experience to think about. Like, how many times have you got how many threat actors have you had sanctioned that you've worked on? What's a threat actor, right? Like, so there are a lot of interesting approaches. I think there's a lot of talk in the public space around public partnerships, but academia and private sector partnerships are equally as important, if not more so. And I will advocate for that by saying, if the people that are doing the jobs and the people that want to hire the people to do the jobs don't communicate what is necessary, what is actually practical, what we're actually facing to academia, we're going to end up with sort of paper tiger sort of graduates, right? Like Matt said, I've got a master's in cybersecurity, but I don't know how to look at a packet capture, or I don't know how to differentiate i- uh, arbitrary TCP, TCP exfiltration, or arbitrary protocols using TCP for exfiltration versus, I don't know, what actually does this PowerShell do? Is this normal? Yeah, actually, surprisingly, PowerShell with base64 obfuscation is really common in legitimate use cases because it's a kind of sketchy compression mechanism. You'd be surprised at how often the benign looks just like the malicious. It's just the intent.
Yeah. And Matt, any commentary on that?
Yeah, I mean, the way we've structured our program, I think the only tenure track faculty member we have is the program director, right? Who's actually got a PhD and he's doing the whole academic thing. And all of the other instructors are like me. They're all working professionals who are teaching on the side. And I will admit there are times that I'm very jealous of my colleagues in math who don't have to update their calculus syllabus every time they teach it, because really not that much has changed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's like Brandon said, it's very helpful to get that real world practitioner experience into the classroom, because this is a field of study that is constantly changing. The bad guys are constantly coming up with new stuff. We're constantly inventing new tools and defenses. And that speed and that responsiveness kind of runs counter to a lot of traditional academic incentives, right? It would be very difficult for somebody who is a full-time academic to also keep up with all this stuff. But I think this is, if I can soapbox for a minute, I think this is one of the scenarios where the concept of adjunct faculty is working exactly the way it's supposed to, right? The idea is to bring in people from outside who have special experience and share it with the students, as opposed to the way adjuncts are used in a lot of institutions, which is, we don't want to hire a tenure track faculty member to teach freshman English, so instead we'll hire 3 adjuncts and pay them starvation wages.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask that question. Would you ever consider doing this full time? And it sounds like the answer is no, because you're concerned that your expertise might get stale, or you just might not have the freshest fresh information to bring to the student body. Does that sound right?
I've definitely thought about that from my perspective. I don't think I would when I retire, like, and I'm at a place where I just don't necessarily think I'm going to be able to keep up anymore. Then I think it would be a little bit more attractive to me. But right now, where I am in my where I am personally in my career, there's just too much to learn, like every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And just because you go through or you don't go through a formal education program doesn't mean you shouldn't be learning. If you're not learning every
Yeah.
single day, especially in our industry, like, you are absolutely going to come out on the bottom, or as a just ineffectual, right?
Yeah. And Matt, like, if you were talking to somebody and they said, "Hey, I'm considering a professorship. I've got a local university who says they need somebody to teach cybersecurity," what would you recommend they evaluate, like with like work-life balance or anything like that, before they actually did that? Is what things did you consider, and what things would you recommend other people?
I think it depends on the kind of institution, right? If you're at a big research university, your experience being a tenured professor is going to be a lot different than if you're at a smaller liberal arts school that has a big emphasis on teaching. Um, Personally, I enjoy the teaching part. I enjoy interacting with students. Everything else about being a real professor looks like a total drag, so I'm glad I don't do it.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
The publish or die paradigm is still very, very real. And I've published plenty in like private sector stuff, but like, I don't know if I don't think I could do the academia version of that, to be frank. I mean, more power to those who have chosen to do that. Um, Definitely advancing things in a different direction than what practitioners tend to do. We tend to be more tactically focused. Um, but yeah, I don't think I could do it.
So, like, if a student was coming to you and asked you, or a potential student, and said, what should I have before joining your courses, like Matt and Brandon? Or what should I have with me before starting your course? And what would I expect to learn in your course? What would you cover? The other question I should add at the end is, what kinds of work would they most prepare me for? Can you give me a sense of that? Like, what should they bring to the table? What are they going to learn? And what's the direct application for the industry?
So, if I can nerd out for a minute,
Please do.
if you've played Dungeons and Dragons, you're probably familiar with the concept of a dual class character, right? You're one thing for a
Yes.
little while, and then you switch to being something else. You're a fighter, and then you're a wizard or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been of the opinion that security works best as a dual class in that sense, right? You come up as desktop support or help desk or network engineering, and then transfer into a more security focused role. And the reason for that is that so much of security is thorough, competent, well documented operations. And you need to understand operations and how IT works and how people work and how operating systems work and how networking works before you can hope to secure it, right?
Mhm.
One of the really unfortunate things about our current moment in security is a lot of people look at it and they say, look, I have no technical expertise, but I just got a banner ad for an 8-week boot camp that tells me they can tell me everything I need to know about security, and then I can go out and get a job making lots of money. And I'm sick of working in, service industry jobs or whatever, so I'm going to do that. And it's possible that you can ramp up and learn a bunch of buzzwords and maybe even fake your way through an interview, but you're not going to understand any of the underlying principles, right? You're not going to understand. You might know what an IDS is, but you're not going to know how the rules work, and you're certainly not going to know why a rule says something is bad after you go through one of these super quick boot camp experiences. So I think to get the most out of cybersecurity training, whether it's formal academic training or something like a SANS course, you need to have a baseline of technical knowledge, not anything super deep, but you need to know like what's a TCP port, right?
Mhm.
Things like that. I can't if I'm teaching you in the red teaming course, I can't teach you about like a buffer overflow attack if you don't know anything about how memory works or how networks work or how that data gets injected or why it's bad. And it's tough. And I know that sometimes saying, you need to have this knowledge before you start really getting serious about security, sometimes that's interpreted as gatekeeping, right? Like I'm being mean and I'm trying to keep people out of the field. That is the absolute last thing I want. I'm teaching these courses, and Brandon's probably in the same boat. Not because of the fat adjunct paychecks, but I'm teaching them because I want future colleagues to be well trained and ready for this work. And because very few private enterprises are willing to put in the time and the money and the resources to build these talent pipelines and train people up themselves, right?
Mhm.
I'm in Buffalo, New York, so I'm in a smaller city. Um, we have a constant shortage of senior engineers and senior security people. Um, so what ends up happening is the big companies here are just poaching engineers from each other constantly because nobody wants to be the one to take that step forward and say, all right, I'm going to train up my juniors to be seniors, because they know as soon as it happens, their new seniors are all going to get poached, right? We're in this weird spot right now where we have a ton of people who are trying to get in. We have very few seniors, and we don't have anyone building a bridge from one to the other. Um, so that's something that I'm trying to rectify. And I apologize. I know that rambled a little bit off the question, but it's something that I'm passionate about.
To echo something that Matt said, there's this problem in the security workforce, which presents itself. What if we train them and they don't stay? And the counter is, what if we don't train them and they do? Right? Um, I would much rather to train them and have competence and they don't stay, but incentivize them to actually grow and stay. Right? Like that seems like a no-brainer to me. I think the pipeline is. I emphasize I empathize with graduates right now. I empathize with anybody trying to get into security, especially those who have, I'm not going to say con, but have fallen into the trap of the 8-week boot camp, etc. Because this job will burn you out, right? I don't do security stuff. I didn't used to look at ransomware or try to find victims and preempt ransomware stuff because I was getting paid a lot. I would have burned out if I was doing this for a paycheck. And that is sort of a mindset that I think is missed in a lot of the dialogue around, oh, you can go, well, it's obviously missed when you go into the dialogue of, oh, you can make a lot of money with a cybersecurity career. Well, sure, that's great, but you're going to burn out in a year or 2 years, or you're going to be really crap at it and never get a job. right? So not having the aptitude or at least the adaptive mindset um, is a recipe for failure. I will say that my program differs quite a bit from Matt's in that there's zero expectation of technical background whatsoever. Um, and there are many. I've had a number of students that have pivoted their careers away from what would might have been a lobbying or like or a congressional staffer type of career to looking at intelligence analyst roles, to looking at analyst types of roles, which I think is a really particularly interesting pivot, right? Given it's an elective at 8 in the morning. Um, so I think it's a really interesting. I think there's room for a lot of different ways to think. Technical skills can be learned, but you have to be willing to actually put in the effort to learn them. There are countless resources out there to do that. Like I provide the class a definitions list of words that I will probably use and that I just don't have time to break down and explain to them.
Is any of those thrunting?
I was there when that word was created. Do not cite the old magic to me. Um, uh, that's a whole different story and requires significantly more beer. Um,
I mean, it is 9
but
a.m. It's a
like
little early, but
it is 9 a.m. Yes, you're right. Maybe 5 o'clock closer in Japan, which is a country I would love to be in right now. Just in general, love the country. Great cybersecurity practitioners. Very, very interesting culture around cybersecurity there, actually.
there's, I guess, two questions. The first and last one. So, I mean, and there's a lot more stuff I would love to ask, and maybe there's a second follow up after this. But what is the student of today, or rather, what is the practitioner of today going to look like once they graduate courses not unlike yours? What are you seeing as far as their areas and focus of expertise and where they might need help? So we're talking to the industry right now, and you mentioned that like they could use better training programs and thinking about how do you turn juniors into seniors. But what things do you think the industry is going to needs to do in order to facilitate the students that you're seeing come out of programs like yours?
I think from my perspective, a lot of it is identifying not just aptitude, but supporting that as well. It's great to have someone that is willing to learn. It's great to have someone that is willing to put in the time, but you actually have to backstop that, right? Um, like actually having support for that sort of apparatus is very important. I would also say that it is particularly, I think one of the things in which we struggle with as an industry, as in security in general, is actual communication, right? What is the stock analyst's absolute least favorite thing to do is writing that short form narrative of what the hell happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have tools like AI and LLMs to help assist with that. Um, but making sure that people understand how to communicate what they're doing, why they're doing it, is really important. Um, and I can't overstate that enough. Where yeah, you may understand exactly what you analyze. You may be able to parallel reconstruct that malware compromise and everything that's going on there. But if you can't communicate that in any meaningful way, you're going nowhere, right? Your budget's
Mm-hmm.
going to get slashed. Nothing's going to be successful. So I think those two things is facilitating the actual communications and understanding um, the mechanisms that we have available to us and the tools that are up and coming that help us communicate, and reinforcing the aptitude of those who are willing to take this risk and join an industry that is really stressful. I'm 22 years old. I look like I'm 45. I kid. But like it can be a very stressful industry, right? Um, there are times where I've worked 36 hours straight doing IR. I don't do that anymore because I'm an old man, but I loved every second of it. I've we've done, I think probably Matt and I have probably done red teams or writing up the results of a red team exercise that have taken 48 hours. I did the OSCP. It was a 48-hour exam. I slept for like 3 hours, right? that's reality, right? It's not a 9 to 5. You're always on. There's always bad stuff going on. There's always bad things happening. That Friday 4 in the afternoon sort of thing, that trope is real. Every goddamn 0 day comes out on Friday at 4 p.m. I don't understand why coordinated disclosures are terrible, but that's reality. It's not an easy industry. It's not a and something Matt said is like, it's not beginner friendly, right? It is really not a beginner friendly industry. You will get ground out and shoot up, and we really need to consider whether we want it to be. Do we have the appropriate support apparatus or understanding of what it would require for a real junior to be involved? I think where we used to work, Dave, actually had a decent pipeline for that. There was just no graduating beyond a certain level where we were, where we used to work, but it had a very good junior pipeline.
It did. But that was not planned. That was just because people like yourself, myself, Corey Pruitt, shout out to him, who interviewed me, and the interview is basically an IQ test. I guess I'm okay. But there wasn't much in the way of that. It was just looking for aptitude. But the training program was self-structured. It was just do this and then we'll figure out, like Ed Martin basically was my mentor for the vast majority of that, and then Allison for the other half, like, of what I was learning on how to spot bad stuff.
Yeah, I had Travis and Allison, and then whenever I could nag people at on like the detection engineering, it wasn't called that back then, but what is now a detection engineering team, whenever I could, I would. Oh, there's a new signature for a new thing. What did you find? How did you find it? Like, stuff like that was always fascinating to me.
Yep. With the interest of time, I wanted to just give you guys the space, like Matt, any projects that you're working on that you want to shout out, any worthy causes, B-sides, perhaps, with the best scarves in B-sides history.
Yeah, so I'm the founder and the lead organizer for B-sides Buffalo. We just had our 4th event. It was very successful, sold out at 300 tickets. We're growing every single year. So if you're in Western New York, check that out. I also organize a monthly meetup called InfoSec 716. And if you're looking for a good place to send your charity donations, Chris Sanders, who you've probably all heard of, operates the Rural Tech Fund. It's a charity that funds technology projects in rural and underserved communities. They do absolutely fantastic work. So reach out to them.
I am nowhere near as cool as Matt running events. I just don't have the organizational brain or patience for it, to be honest. I forgot to book dinners for my own team offsites. It's like, just to give you an idea of type of organizational capability sometimes that I have.
Let me know. I know a lot of good places to eat in your area.
I will shout out some old teammates of mine from when I worked at the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, a hackathon project that I was not involved with. I will take 0 credit because I earned 0 credit on this. A project called KC7 Cyber. It is dynamically generated, basically blue team environments that teach people how to hunt and how to perform the role of a threat hunter and an intelligence analyst. Really what we did in almost all my research roles was at Palo Alto, at Google, at Microsoft. It's a nonprofit. They go around teaching at high schools, colleges, conferences. I use it in my own course because it's a great level set, and it walks people through. So KC7 Cyber, check it out if you're trying to learn practical hands-on for free. Fantastic resource. I can't stress that enough how great it is.
Awesome. Thank you both very much, Matt, Brandon. Appreciate it greatly. Thanks for coming on the Job Security Podcast. I'm Dave Johnson, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Job Security Podcast, sponsored by Expel MDR. This podcast was co-hosted by Dave Johnson and Tyler Zito and was produced by me, Ben Baker. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, please consider giving us a glowing 5-star rating and review on your podcast app of choice. And be sure to follow us on YouTube for more cybersecurity content at youtube.com/@expelsecurity. We'll catch you next time.